Last time we spoke about why the APC flag bearer would win and why he would not win. Today we will be focusing on the next candidate on the ballot. Before we continue, if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, into your long, please, it's completely free and you can change your mind later. Just hit on the subscribe button. Of course, you can hit the notification bell also to get notifications about whenever there are new contents. But please share with friends, folks, and subscribe as we try to approach 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for your support. If you like the video, give it a like so that we can keep serving you this content till election results are out. So not just the election day, till election results are out, we will be your eyes and your ears. Without further ado, let's get to business. Just like you would have guessed in the last video, the next candidate on the ballot is the Labour Party presidential candidate Peter Obi. So we're moving from the batified to the obedient and useful. Before we continue, I must clear the air about two things. I think just like I did in the last video, I'll clear the air. Number one is the fact that in the last decade, social media has always voted and will vote. Don't get it twisted. In 2011, Jonathan stole the social media headlines as the lucky boy who hustled his way to the top. There were news of when his governor's wife, when he was deputy governor, his governor's wife slapped him on the face. That was Mrs. Alamasiega. And of course, the biggest social media movement that was then was titled that he had no shoes. Jonathan had no shoes. He sold that market to us, and all of us we bought into it. And at the end, Jonathan had 22 million votes. Don't forget that both Buhari and Tinubu also were very active in the presidential election that year, where Buhari finished second to Goodluck, who had 22 million votes. Buhari had 12 million, and Tinubu's Nuru Ribadu had 2 million votes. Now, when you fast track to 2015, the APC was able to also use a similar tactic in a better way, where they did something that had never happened in Nigeria history: the unthinkable, to unseat the incumbent president. And there were so many social media polls where there were famous economists like GEG versus GMB, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan versus General Muhammadu Buhari, and social media was buzzing everywhere. Everybody was saying that former military dictator, now democratic president. And so many things that were showing the posters of the fact that, oh, Buhari has done it before, he can do it again. Social media was buzzing and everything, and it contributed to the fact that Buhari was able to unseat the ruling president, where he had 16 million votes to Goodluck's 12 million votes in 2015. So the number two thing that we must know is that some persons compared Obi to Sowore. Number two thing I must clear is that some persons are comparing Obi to Sowore, to Moghalu and to Fela Drote in 2019. I know that they had supporters. I'm talking about Sowore, Fela Drote and Moghalu. I will not deny the fact they had supporters, but honestly speaking, their supporters never started a fire. When I mean they never started a fire, it was never this big movement. And don't forget or take it into account the fact that the person you're likening these guys to had been a former governor, two-term former governor before. So he's not exactly in their political stature as the rest of the Fela Drotes, the Sowores, and the Moghalus. So it is very, very sad that some persons are thinking that, oh, since Sowore, who was the person that had the highest number of votes among all of them possibly, pulled out 33,000 votes, I think it was Moghalu, pulled out some 33,000 votes or 110,000 votes for Moghalu or thereabout, that Peter Obi would not have up to maybe 500,000 votes, for example. I stand to disagree, simply because this guy is also one of the leading candidates of next year's election. In short, I can almost tell you that we will be seeing something pan out like what happened in 2011, where we had Goodluck with 22 million votes, we had Buhari with 12 million votes, and we had Nuru Ribadu with 2 million votes. Now, I'm not saying that the gap will be that far. I'm just saying that just like in that year, we had 3 major contenders. Next year, we should be having 4 major contenders. And I don't want to categorize Obi as the one of the Sowores who were the all others, quote and unquote, in 2019. This is no disrespect to anybody. It's just trying to state the obvious fact from what we saw in 2019. Now, let's go straight to the rest of the things and let's look at the video proper. Now, why Obi can win? Why Obi can win? Now, first and foremost, please take note of my statement. I'm not saying that these are the people that are likely going to win. I'm just saying the possibility of why they can win and why they could possibly not win. So I'm not saying they would not win, and I'm not saying that they would win. Now, why Obi can win? The first and foremost is the population structure of Nigeria. I will take a practical example from Angola. Angola, if you are following Angola very well, Angola has held their elections. And one thing you must understand about the structure in Angola is that Angola, where they had about 18 million voters, I think 18 million, no, I think they had 18 million voters. Out of 18 million voters, about 14 or 16 million of them are below the age of 35. Of course, my facts may not be completely 100%, but from what I was able to gather together about the Angolan elections, we understand that about 14 million out of the 18 million are young people. So the same thing also applies to Nigeria, where we understand that the Nigerian population is a youthful population where a lot of people are younger persons, and the younger persons have tended to appeal to the obedient movement and to the Kwakwasiya movement, which we're coming to later on in some other videos. So we see that the larger population, the population structure in Nigeria depicts that Obi, who has garnered himself to the hearts of the young ones, has a reality to get most of the youths across the country on his side, whether from the south or possibly from the north, even where people feel that he doesn't have enough structure to get the north. The reality is that we heard about some news that happened some few months ago, where some persons posted Obi's face on mats that were used in the mosque, even in some core northern states. And a lot of things came up and everything. So if you're saying that this guy doesn't have the entrance into the north, you will be deceiving yourself, simply because there have been some movements happening more in the north than even in the south. For example, in Nasarawa, there was that 1 million march for Peter Obi. So he has sold into the hearts of many young persons in Nigeria. So that's one of the first and the major advantage of Peter Obi with respect to next year's presidency. The second advantage is the clamor for a president from the southeast. Many people will say, oh no, next year's election is not ethnical, it's not this, it's not that. Yes, it's true that we're in the civilized nation where we should be looking at things from a logical perspective, but we must not forget the fact that a good percentage of Nigerians are either illiterates, semi-literates, or underliterate, if there's something like that. And I'll give you a practical example. The reason why Nigeria cannot run an election on the mobile phone is simply because we still have so many persons who are not yet using smartphones, and there's some parts of the world that have not yet come to terms with respect to good internet facilities and using of all these devices. For example, when the ATMs came into the country, when ATM machines came into the country, it took a while before so many persons got accustomed to using the ATM. And that's why you see that many security operatives in the ATM banks, in the bank's ATM machine side, they put a security operative there who can at least operate the machine to help some of the elderly ones, some persons who necessarily are not exactly literate, whether they may even be young ones, but they are not exactly literate, to get some of these things done. So the reality is that the second advantage is the clamor for this president from the southeast. There is that sentiment that always clamor, that always creeps in within the mind of Nigerians. No matter how literate we tend to tell ourselves, there's that clamor for let's have somebody who is different. So for example, we had enjoyed the tenure of the Yorubas, we've enjoyed the tenure of maybe the Hausas, we've enjoyed the tenure of somebody even from the south. So possibly the clamor for a southeast president. And you see some politicians coming out to tell you that some of the reasons why they are queuing behind this man is because of the clamor for a southeast president. So when we look at those things, some of those things point into as advantages for a Peter Obi's presidency. And the third advantage is the Labour Party. Many people will be surprised by what I'm about to say, that why is this an advantage to Obi? Obi stepped into the party and Obi made the party popular. Well, not exactly. So instead, Obi actually woke up the sleeping giants in the Labour Party, because this is a party where you would not forget the fact that they had also won some elections before in the time past. They had powerful leaders, for example, Shomole, who is now in APC, and some other things like that. They've also contested some elections. They've been like the possible third force sometimes, and then you would see them as a giant who was sleeping, that Obi and his obedience movements came to wake up, because the being obedient and useful and all those things that happen in the social media in our world today, or in Nigeria today. However, the reality is that, like I mentioned, there is an advantage with Labour Party, and that is because there is an hidden but very big power of the Labour Party. And this is something that we are even beginning to see, that even the ruling party is underestimating. A lot of people are underestimating that particular power. And this is about the unions. So for example, from the records I got, I believe that the NLC, the Labour Party was built on the platform or on the foundations of the NLC. And the NLC, Nigerian Labour Congress, is having has a connection with about 16 different unions, which I cannot mention all of them from my head. Of course, I know about ASU, I know about NUJ, I know about NUEE, which I heard of recently, the electric workers, who all of a sudden woke up one morning and said that there are arrears that have not been paid since 2016, that because of that they want to go on strike. And then they went on strike for a day where there was no light throughout that particular day, especially for those of us who were in some other parts of the country like Lagos and some other thing. We saw that there was no light, and then later on they had an emergency meeting with the government, decided to give the government 2 weeks to resolve it. If not, possibly they'll be taking the light in some couple of days. And then the government is put under pressure. The doctors also are requesting for allowance. That's what they did last year. ASU is on strike. And then we know of SANU, though they recently called off their strike. We know of NASU. We know of all these different bodies where they all queue up behind the Nigerian Labour Congress, all fighting for labor and everything. And we understand that the Labour Party was built on the Nigerian Labour Congress. So we see that the Labour Party, in a way, is giving an advantage as it tries to, or as it kinds of paints the flaws of the current ruling party, which stands as the party to beat. Permit me to say, but at the moment, because the ruling party is the ruling party, they are the party to beat. So for anybody who's going to be winning next year's elections, whether it's for the remaining three in terms of the PDP, the Labour Party, and the NNPP, they have to put in mind that the party to beat is likely the APC. So if APC doesn't win the election next year, there's a strong tendency that they would finish second. That's what I'm trying to say. So they are the party to beat. And so many persons know that with doing all these things, they get to show up the poor rate of the current administration. It affects the possibility or the voting population for the APC in next year's general elections. For example, when I was saying in our last video that one of the disadvantages for Tinubu, which could also be the advantage for him, is how well or how poorly this administration does. That is the Buhari-led administration. And the more there are flaws showing how poor the administration is doing, the more they lose votes. And it's a matter of how many votes they lose between now and next year's general elections. So the Labour Party is a very big strength for Peter Obi and his movement, judging by the fact that every single thing, for example, you see ASU, you see Labour Party, Nigerian Labour Congress coming out to support ASU in a protest in Lagos. That's a question. Why should Nigerian Labour Congress be coming out to protest on behalf of ASU? All these things, they may say it's not political on the surface and everything, which is true, but in a way, it adds more to the political acumen, or it puts more political feathers on Obi's cap. So at the end of the day, it's an advantage for the man who flies the flag of the Labour Party. The fourth advantage is the yearning for a change. For many years, Nigeria have been looking for a proper third force or a change. APC promised to give us the change that we wanted in 2015, but they under-delivered. When we had our expectations so high and they brought our expectations so low. Nigerians have been pushed to the brim and can no longer endure another 4 years, not even 8 years. They can no longer endure another 4 years of hell. Somebody sang in a song recently saying that they're telling me to go to hell, but even Nigeria is already okay. So you can imagine that somebody is already comparing Nigeria to hell, and people are looking at, they are frustrated, they are tired. There is a yearning for a change. And the major thing that is going for Obi is the fact that people are looking for something that is different from the social norm. But permit me to say something that I heard earlier today, where somebody is saying that they don't want something that looks like the old recycling of politicians. And that's why people are saying that maybe the Labour Party appears to be a different party from the others in terms of not having to recycle politicians that we already know or that we have worked with, we have tasted, and we have seen that the boys are not good. Something like that. So you're looking for somebody who is different from the status quo. And the introduction of Obi, who had served as a 2-time governor under APGA, please take note, it was not PDP, it was under APGA. And then you see the place of him bringing Dati Baba Ahmed, who was also a senator. And then, he was a senator that was unknown for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, we're hearing his voice and everything like that. It tends to be something that looks like, oh, this could be a chance. So there's a lot of sentiment votes. Let me use that word. There's a lot of sentiment votes going towards the obedient movement. And next year, we would see that by the time the elections happen left, right, and center, the hardcore voters or the hardcore supporters, let me use that word, the hardcore supporters will stick behind their candidates, and then we'll be left with the sentiment votes. Now, depending on if the sentiment vote is large or is few, but depending on the amount, I feel Obi will likely pull more percentage of the sentiment votes than every of the other parties. And this is not to say that he's going to win the election. It's just a matter of the fact that you are trying to make things work properly. And Obi also had made some very good steps in terms of who he chose as his running mate. He stepped away from the urge or from the possibility of choosing possibly maybe another Southerner. For example, when he kept doing Yokukwe as the temporary slot holder for the vice presidential position. Instead of taking another Southerner, he made sure he went for a Northerner. Of course, to boost his political chances, which is true. But he did not just go for a Northerner, he went for a Northerner who was a Muslim. So he was able to balance the ticket, as Nigerians will always call it, and avoid anything that would take away the sentiment votes from him. So he's likely to get the sentiment votes because of the fact that he has possibly put everything right, sells to the heart of the youths, and people are looking for something that is different from the status quo. Now let's go straight to his disadvantages and let's look at why Obi could possibly not win. Why Obi could possibly not win. Yes, we know that Obi is gaining more followers day by day, and most of them are without PVC at the beginning of this year. So at the beginning of year 2022, a lot of them were without PVC. The first problem for Mr. Obi is that can your supporters, that is, can the supporters, the obedient and the useful, even vote in the first place? Because if we look carefully at it, we discover that a lot of them did not have PVC at the turn of the year. Of course, a lot of people came out in mass and started registering their PVCs around May, June. It was extended to July and everything. But we still got to know that a lot of persons were stranded. They were not given the opportunity to finally get that PVC. There are some persons who spent 3 days, 4 days on the queue just for them to get this PVC. And at the end, for some persons, they were not still able to get the PVC. So the question is, a lot of persons who shout obedience and co, who are supporters of the obedient, whether on the social media or off the social media, the push to many of the youths who are the supporters of the obedient movement is if they have their PVC, if they have the opportunity to even vote in the first place. Because I kid you not, if you don't have your PVC, there is no way you can cast your vote, and then it's all in vain. I've seen interview sessions of persons who say, "Oh, who do you want to vote for?" They said next day they will want to vote for Peter Obi, but they don't have their PVC. So the question is, if enough of them have PVCs to be able to cast their votes and push Obi to the coveted seats. The second disadvantage where I feel for Obi is a bit from the first one, but it's an extension from the first one, is that most of those who would vote for Labour Party are inexperienced at the polls. Now, we know that there are three types of votes. It's that you were voted for, or you were voted against, or the vote did not even count at all. So they call them votes that were counted as null and void. Now, because a lot of them are inexperienced in the polls, there's a tendency for them not to vote properly. Maybe they make mistakes, and judging by the fact that INEC has refused to put the people's pictures on the ballot paper, at least as at time of recording, they are yet to put people's pictures on the ballot paper. It means that there's a logical reason to it, because INEC knows that based on the Nigerian dynamics, it's possible for the courts to rule a case that, oh, this person did not finish the primaries properly, or somebody else has finished primaries properly, and then 2 days before the election, they need to go and change the face of the person for that party who was written on the polls, who was written on the ballot papers. So those are some of the reasons why INEC uses the parties instead of the people's faces. And which is, like I said, it's a valid reason. But because of the level of coming back to the obedience, because of the level of their inexperience in the polls, there is a tendency for them not to vote properly, and thereby we may have the case of many null or void votes. And it could fall for those who would have wished to vote for the Labour Party. Not to joke around, there was a time when in the APC primary elections that we had so many persons who could not actually write in the ballot paper, and then I think they came from one particular state in the north, which I would not mention. And then they needed to bring in people that would guide them to help them in writing down who they wanted to vote for, because they were not literate enough to do it. Sorry to say, but that's the reality of election. The third disadvantage is alliances. So whether you call it allegiances, alliances, depending on the English that you use, this could actually be one of the biggest disadvantages yet for the obedient movement. Whether you like it or not, there is a need for you to get the numbers you are looking for. You're looking at numbers that can actually win you the election, get you across the line. Of course, you see that in the Kenyan elections, where Ruto also won, you had to have some alliances with some persons. They were coming together, or the coalition of some parties, to actually get things done. Of course, Obi tried to have an alliance with NNPP, and if it had happened, the alliance between Obi and Kwankwaso would possibly have been game over by now for the PDP and the APC, but the alliance didn't happen. And the reality is that there are still some notable persons that he could have those alliances with. For example, Obi is cutting Wike, which every single person is cutting Wike at the moment. But Obi cutting Wike is a good step in the right direction. It still needs a lot of political alliances. The more you can get before the election day, the better for you. Of course, judging by the fact that you need those votes, you need those pool of votes. And whether you say, oh, we're trying to leave the norm and everything, yes, it is possible to push the energy, but there is a need to also face the reality. Optimism will get you as far as you want to get, but a single mistake could bring the fire crushing down. So there is a need for those alliances to happen. A lot of Peter Obi networks, Peter Obi support groups and everything, those things are super important, and it needs to keep forming as many alliances as possible. So the reality is that he has a very big disadvantage in terms of the alliances. Of course, Tinubu is the master tactician in terms of the fact that he has a lot of political structures working in his favor. And then when you look at the case of PDP, may not be as strong as Tinubu's own, but there are also a lot of political structures put in place, a lot of alliances. Of course, you can see that it was one of the things that got Atiku the presidential ticket, where he had people stepping down for him even at the final minutes, and then he was able to pick Wike to the PDP presidential ticket. Of course, those are the things that we're talking about in terms of alliances. You need those alliances from this corner, this corner, this corner. There are a lot of people that have stood up for him, don't get me wrong, and then he still needs as more people as possible to stand up for him, back him up for him to actually win. And amongst every of the candidates, he's the one with the least number of alliances. Now, the fourth and the final disadvantage is funds. To sponsor a campaign without vote buying, you still need billions of naira. So, of course, we're saying, oh, Obi is not going to stand for vote buying. Oh, well, that's true, possibly. But the reality is that even if you don't buy votes, you need to pay party agents, and you need at least one or two party agents in each of the polling units. So there's no way you're not still going to spend billions of naira for all the party agents across the entire federation. That's number one. Number two is that you need to run campaigns, print shirts, print flyers, print flags, print this, print that. You know what? Try to help market people, all those different things you have to do. Carry speaker, do jingle, all those things. There is no way you would not spend billions of naira for a campaign. So while Obi is a billionaire as well, of course, and his running mate is also doing well in terms of Yusuf Dati Baba Ahmed, the reality is they are lower on funds. When you look at the entire party, the entire Labour Party is lower on funds when we compare them to the APC, the PDP, and even the NNPP has a better fund structure than the Labour Party. So these are some of the disadvantages because you need funds. Of course, there was a time when one of the popular activists, who was saying that we needed to contribute money for Obi's elections, is the reality. And she was talking in terms of 100 billion naira, which is a reality because without funds, your campaign cannot go smoothly. Without funds, you cannot sponsor the event from September 28th or whenever the campaigns are going to start down to the finish line after February 28th. So these things are very important, and these are the disadvantages with respect to why I feel Obi could possibly come close but end up not winning. So now, like I said, he has some advantages, he has some disadvantages. So it depends on how things are able to structure in and who ends up winning. But to wrap it all up, I will let you to know that how much Obi would gain as supporters. You know, when I was talking about the APC last year, I was talking about the fact that the number of supporters that they lose will determine whether they lose next year's election or not. In Obi's case and in case of Labour Party, the number of supporters that they gain who are able to vote, that is, they have their PVC and they are able to vote, and they come out and they vote properly, and they have enough funds to sponsor the campaign, will determine whether Obi is able to win the coveted seat or not. The reality is that he is not yet a front runner, but is among the front running candidates to win next year's elections. The other candidates already have some sworn allies. While he may have passionate followers, he has passionate followers. Those ones already have sworn allies. They have those who are ready to die for them. So the moment the fire dies, then the followers will begin to turn back. His gigantic task is to keep the passion up till the election day and make it bring out the needed votes in them. He needs to bring them out to vote. Some persons should not be there on that day. They begin to start saying they are following English Premier League and waiting for whether Man U and Chelsea are playing on that day. They need to come out to vote. Like I mentioned, the level of inexperience amongst his followers could possibly be a downfall on that day. Thank you for sticking with us throughout this video. In the next video, we'll be considering the next mighty man in the ballot, another intimidating presence in Nigerian politics. My name remains Shegun, and I'm speaking from TepTV. I just tell you wetin I sabi o.